99% of you are not subscribed to the channel. At 1,000 subscribers, I will post a series of special stories. Subscribe now.
In the small town of Redwood Pines, nestled deep in the shadow of towering pines and rolling hills, life moved at a leisurely pace. The town's quaint streets, lined with rustic shops and cozy homes, seemed untouched by the chaos of the outside world. It was a place where everyone knew everyone, and strangers were greeted with a warm smile and a nod of recognition. The townsfolk went about their daily routines, unaware that a storm was brewing just beyond the stars. David "Ghost" Carter had chosen Redwood Pines for its tranquility. He was a man of few words, tall and imposing with a steely gaze that spoke of a past filled with battles fought in the darkest corners of the world. He kept to himself, living in a modest cabin on the outskirts of town, far enough to avoid prying eyes but close enough for the occasional visit to the general store. The locals had grown accustomed to his presence, though they knew little about the man who lived with only his dog for company. Max, a German shepherd with a coat as dark as midnight, was more than just a pet. To David, Max was family, a loyal companion who had been by his side through thick and thin. The dog was a veteran of countless missions, trained to be as much a soldier as David himself. Max had saved David's life more times than he could count, and in return, David had given Max a home, a peaceful life away from the battlefield. But even in this quiet town, they maintained their discipline, their daily routines a reflection of the lives they once led. Every morning before the sun crested the hills, David and Max would rise together. They would run through the forest trails, the cool morning air filling their lungs as they navigated the rugged terrain with ease. To the townspeople who occasionally glimpsed them, it was a simple morning jog. But to David and Max, it was a way to stay sharp, to keep the edge honed. After the run, they would return to the cabin where David would cook breakfast, eggs, bacon, and toast for himself, and a special protein mix for Max. The rest of the day was spent in quiet reflection. David would read, his mind always seeking to learn, to grow, while Max would rest by the fireplace, his ears perked up, ever vigilant. Sometimes David would take out his old gear, cleaning and maintaining it as a form of meditation. He would check the weapons, ensure the blades were sharp, the firearms clean, even though he hoped he would never have to use them again. Max would watch, his keen eyes never missing a movement, always ready to respond if needed. Despite the peace they had found, David could never fully shake the feeling that something was watching them. It was a sensation he had learned to trust over the years, an instinct that had saved him on more than one occasion. But in Redwood Pines, there was no reason for such paranoia, or so he tried to convince himself. Max seemed to sense it too, often growling at shadows or staring intently at the night sky, as if he could see something David could not. One evening, after another uneventful day, David sat on the porch of his cabin, sipping a cold beer as the sun dipped below the horizon. Max lay at his feet, his head resting on his paws. The town was quiet, the only sounds coming from the distant chirping of crickets and the rustling of leaves in the breeze. David let out a contented sigh, feeling the tension in his muscles ease. This was the life he had always wanted. Peaceful, simple, away from the horrors of war. But peace is often a fleeting thing. As the night grew darker, David's unease returned, stronger than before. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Max stood up, his ears alert, his nose twitching as if catching a scent on the wind. David set down his beer, his senses suddenly on high alert. He scanned the tree line, his hand instinctively reaching for the knife he always kept strapped to his belt. The forest around them was silent, too silent. And in that silence, David's military instincts screamed that danger was near. Without warning, Max bolted into the woods, a low growl rumbling from his chest. David called out to him, but the dog was already gone, disappearing into the darkness. David's heart raced as he grabbed his gear, his mind racing through possibilities. Max was trained to never leave his side unless there was a threat. Something or someone had triggered the dog's instincts. David sprinted after Max, his eyes adjusting to the dim light as he moved swiftly through the trees. The forest was dense, the underbrush tugging at his clothes as he pushed forward. His breath came in steady, controlled bursts as he followed the path Max had taken, his senses heightened by the adrenaline coursing through his veins. After what felt like an eternity, David burst into a small clearing, only to find it empty. There was no sign of Max, no tracks or indications of where he had gone. David knelt to the ground, searching for any clue, but the earth was undisturbed, as if Max had simply vanished. The feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever, and David's hand tightened around the grip of his knife. Before he could react, a bright light enveloped the clearing, blinding him. He raised his arm to shield his eyes, but the light was too intense. He felt a strange pressure in his chest, as if something was pulling him upwards, and then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the light vanished, leaving him alone in the darkness. The forest was silent once more, but this time the silence was different. It was the silence of something unnatural, something beyond David's understanding. He stood there, heart pounding, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Max was gone, and deep down, David knew that whatever had taken him was not of this world. His mind raced as he considered the possibilities. Aliens? Government experiments? Something else entirely? All he knew was that Max was in danger, and he had to get him back. He wasn't just a man anymore, he was a soldier, and no one, human or otherwise, took what was his without paying the price. David turned back towards his cabin, determination etched on his face. He would find Max no matter what it took. The quiet life he had sought was over. The storm had arrived, and David was ready to face it head-on. The hunt was on. David sprinted back to his cabin, the adrenaline coursing through his veins, making the night air feel colder against his skin. His thoughts were racing, trying to piece together what had just happened. The bright light, Max's sudden disappearance, it defied all logic. But logic had no place in David's world anymore. He had faced the unimaginable before, and he would face it again. Bursting through the door of his cabin, David immediately went into action. He activated the security system, a network of sensors and cameras he had installed as a precaution, a habit from his days in the military. He knew it was a long shot, but maybe something had been caught on the cameras that could give him a clue. He quickly accessed the feed on his computer, scanning through the footage of the forest surrounding his property. His heart skipped a beat when he found the moment he was looking for, Max running into the woods, and then nothing. The feed cut out just as the light appeared. No static, no interference, just a clean, sharp cut to black. David slammed his fist on the desk in frustration. Whatever had taken Max was sophisticated enough to disrupt his security system, which meant he was dealing with something far beyond human technology. He had suspected it already, but this confirmed his worst fears. This was the work of something not of this earth. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Panic wouldn't help him now. He had to think like the soldier he once was, methodical and precise. There was no room for error. If Max was still alive, every second counted. David walked over to a hidden panel in the floor of his cabin and pried it open. Inside was a stash of weapons and equipment, remnants of his time in Project Revenant. He had promised himself he would never return to this life, but that promise meant nothing compared to the bond he shared with Max. He strapped on his combat gear, feeling the familiar weight of the tactical vest, the holster, and the knives. He checked his firearms, 2 handguns, a rifle, and a shotgun, ensuring they were all loaded and ready. He pulled out a small device, a handheld scanner that had been designed to detect unusual energy signatures. It was experimental, something his old team had used on missions involving unknown technologies. If there was any trace of whatever had taken Max, this device would find it. As he prepared, David's mind wandered back to Project Revenant. It had been the military's answer to a growing threat, a covert program designed to create super soldiers through a combination of advanced technology, genetic enhancements, and brutal training. The project had been a success, but at a great cost. Those who survived were no longer just soldiers. They were weapons, ghosts of their former selves. David had been one of the best, earning the nickname Ghost for his ability to move unseen and strike with deadly precision. But the project had taken its toll on him, mentally and physically. When it was finally disbanded, David had walked away, determined to find peace and leave that part of his life behind. But now, that past was coming back to haunt him, and he would have to embrace it once more if he wanted to save Max. With his gear ready, David took one last look around the cabin. This place had been his sanctuary, a haven from the violence and chaos of his former life. But now it was just another battlefield. He closed his eyes for a moment, centering himself, then opened them with renewed determination. He activated the energy scanner and swept it around the cabin. At first there was nothing, just the normal background radiation of the earth. But as he moved towards the door, the device began to beep softly, detecting a faint trace of something. He followed the signal, his heart pounding as the beeping grew louder. The trail led him back into the forest to the clearing where Max had disappeared. The air was still thick with an unnatural silence, and the moon cast an eerie glow on the trees. David moved cautiously, his senses on high alert, every nerve in his body ready to react to the slightest movement. The scanner led him to the exact spot where the bright light had engulfed the clearing. There in the dirt was a faint scorch mark, almost imperceptible but enough to indicate that something had indeed happened here. David knelt down, examining the mark closely. It wasn't caused by any conventional means. No fire, no explosion. It was as if the very air had been burned by some form of energy he couldn't identify. The scanner began to pick up a stronger signal, something more concentrated. David looked around, spotting a small metallic object partially buried in the dirt. He carefully dug it out, revealing what appeared to be a piece of alien technology. It was small, no larger than a coin, with strange symbols etched into its surface. The device hummed softly in his hand, its energy resonating with the scanner. David knew he had found a clue, a piece of the puzzle. This object had something to do with Max's disappearance, and it was his only lead. He pocketed the device, his mind already racing with possibilities. He would need to analyze it further, but that would have to wait. Right now he had to follow the signal. The scanner pointed him towards the mountains, where the signal grew stronger with every step. The path was treacherous, the terrain rough and uneven, but David pressed on, driven by a single thought. Max was out there, and he was going to find him. As he climbed higher, the air grew thinner, and the trees became sparse. The signal led him to a secluded area, hidden deep within the mountains. There, nestled between the rocks, was something that didn't belong, a structure, barely visible against the rugged landscape. It was cloaked in some form of camouflage, almost blending perfectly with its surroundings. If it weren't for the scanner, David would have missed it entirely. He approached cautiously, his hand resting on the grip of his rifle. The structure was unlike anything he had seen before, alien, with smooth, organic lines that seemed to pulse with an inner light. There were no doors or windows, just a seamless surface that gave off a faint hum. David took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. He had faced impossible odds before, but this was different. He was about to enter the unknown, with only his instincts and training to guide him. But he couldn't afford to hesitate. Max's life depended on it. He found what appeared to be an entrance, a small opening that led into the heart of the structure. With one last glance at the darkened sky, David stepped inside, leaving the safety of the known world behind. The interior was even more alien than the exterior. The walls glowed with a soft bluish light, and strange symbols floated in the air, shifting and changing as if they were alive. The air was thick with an unfamiliar scent, a mixture of ozone and something metallic. David moved silently, his footsteps barely making a sound on the smooth floor. As he ventured deeper into the structure, the signal from the scanner grew stronger, leading him down a series of twisting corridors. He passed through rooms filled with strange machinery, their purpose unknown but undoubtedly advanced. Everything about this place screamed of technology far beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. Finally, the signal led him to a large chamber at the center of the structure. The room was dimly lit, with a massive console dominating the far wall. In the center of the room was a containment field, a shimmering barrier of energy that seemed to pulse with life. And inside that field was Max. David's heart skipped a beat as he saw his loyal companion, battered and bruised but still alive. Max was restrained by glowing tendrils of energy, his body suspended in midair. His eyes, once so full of life, were now filled with pain and confusion. But when Max saw David, there was a flicker of recognition, a spark of hope. David's fury surged, and he wasted no time. He scanned the console, looking for a way to disable the containment field. The symbols were unlike anything he had seen before, but his instincts guided him. He pressed a series of buttons and the field flickered, then collapsed with a soft hum. Max dropped to the floor, landing heavily. David rushed to his side, checking for injuries. Max was weak, his breathing labored, but he was alive. David gently patted his head, whispering words of comfort. Max responded with a soft whimper, his eyes closing in relief, but they weren't safe yet. The moment was interrupted by a sudden surge of activity in the room. The walls began to glow brighter, and a low, ominous hum filled the air. David's instincts screamed that they were out of time. He scooped Max into his arms, ignoring the strain on his muscles, and made a dash for the exit. As they fled through the corridors, the structure began to tremble, as if it was alive and angry. The walls shifted and closed in, forcing David to take detours through unfamiliar passages. He could feel the alien technology trying to trap them, but he pressed on, driven by the need to get Max to safety. Finally, they burst out into the open air, the cool night breeze hitting their faces. Behind them, the structure shuddered violently, its surface rippling like water before collapsing in on itself with a deafening roar. David didn't look back as he ran, his only focus on getting as far away as possible. When they reached the tree line, David finally allowed himself to stop. He set Max down gently and collapsed beside him, gasping for breath. They were safe for now, but the battle was far from over. Whatever had taken Max wasn't done with them, and David knew they would come again. This was just the beginning. As David cradled Max in his arms, he made a silent vow. Whoever or whatever had done this would pay dearly. They had awoken the soldier within him, and there was no going back. The hunt was on. The dawn broke over the mountains, casting a pale light over the forest as David and Max made their way back to the cabin. The night had taken its toll on both of them, but there was no time to rest. The encounter with the alien structure had confirmed David's worst fears. They were dealing with an enemy far more advanced and dangerous than anything he had ever faced before. But this enemy had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated David and his bond with Max. As they reached the cabin, David laid Max gently on the floor, checking his injuries. The dog was exhausted, his body bruised and battered from the alien torture, but his spirit was unbroken. Max looked up at David with tired eyes, and despite the pain, he managed a faint wag of his tail. David knelt beside him, stroking his fur gently. "You did good, boy," he whispered, "but this isn't over yet." David knew that the alien technology they had encountered was just the tip of the iceberg. The Zentari, as he now knew them to be called, were a ruthless and highly advanced race. They had come to Earth with a purpose, and David was determined to find out what that was. But first he needed more information, and there was only one place he could turn. The Revenant Project had been disbanded, but its members had gone underground, keeping in touch through a clandestine network. David had kept his distance, wanting to leave that life behind. But now he had no choice. He accessed a secure terminal hidden in his cabin, a relic from his days with the project, and initiated a connection to his old team. The screen flickered to life, and soon, the face of Colonel Jackson Ironclad Briggs appeared. The colonel was a grizzled veteran, his face marked with the scars of countless battles. He had been the leader of Project Revenant, a man David respected more than anyone else. "Ghost," Briggs said, his voice gravelly and serious. "Didn't think I'd hear from you again. What's going on?" "Colonel, I need your help," David said, his tone urgent. "It's the Zentari. They're here and they took Max. I got him back, but they're not done. I need intel, everything we have on them." Briggs's expression darkened. "The Zentari? Damn, I hoped they'd stay away from Earth. They've been probing our defenses for years, but we never had solid evidence of an invasion. If they're here, it's worse than we thought." "I need to know what they're planning and how to stop them," David said. "I can't do this alone." Briggs nodded. "You're not alone, Ghost. I'll mobilize the team. We've been keeping tabs on Zentari activity, but we need more data. Send me what you found and I'll see what we can do. In the meantime, get ready. This is going to be a fight." David transmitted the data from the alien device he had retrieved, along with everything he had learned during his encounter at the structure. Briggs studied the information for a moment, then looked back at David. "This is good. We can use this. But listen, Ghost, the Zentari are like nothing we've faced before. They don't just fight. They manipulate, infiltrate, and use our emotions against us. Stay sharp and don't let them get inside your head." "Understood, Colonel," David replied. "Just get me what I need and I'll handle the rest." Briggs gave a curt nod. "We'll be in touch. Stay safe out there, Ghost, and take care of that dog. He's tougher than most of the men I've known." The screen went dark and David leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He couldn't afford to wait for the Zentari to strike again. He had to take the fight to them, to hit them where it hurt before they could execute whatever plan they had in motion. But to do that, he needed more than just brute force. He needed a strategy. David spent the next few hours preparing for the mission ahead. He reviewed the data Briggs had sent him, mapping out potential locations where the Zentari might be operating. There were reports of strange activity in several regions, power fluctuations, unexplained disappearances, and sightings of unusual lights in the sky. Each of these could be a Zentari base, hidden from human eyes by their advanced technology. He couldn't hit them all at once, but he could start with the most likely target, a remote facility deep in the mountains, not far from where Max had been taken. The data suggested this location was a central hub for the Zentari operations in the area. If he could infiltrate it, he might be able to find out what they were planning and shut it down before it was too late. Max, though injured, refused to be left behind. David could see the determination in his eyes, the same fierce loyalty that had made him such a formidable partner. "All right, buddy," David said, patting Max's side. "We're in this together, as always." David geared up, strapping on his weapons and equipment with the precision of a man who had done this 1,000 times before. He activated the cloaking device built into his suit, a piece of advanced technology from the Revenant project that would render him nearly invisible to the naked eye and most forms of detection. Max had his own gear, a lightweight vest equipped with sensors and a small camera, allowing David to monitor his movements. As they left the cabin, the sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows across the forest. The air was cool and the sounds of the wilderness filled the silence, but David's mind was focused on the mission ahead. He moved swiftly and silently through the trees, Max at his side, their movements perfectly synchronized. The journey to the Zentari base was uneventful, but the tension in the air was palpable. David's senses were on high alert, every rustle of leaves and distant animal call making him tighten his grip on his rifle. As they neared the location, the terrain became more rugged, the trees thinning out as they climbed higher into the mountains. Finally, they reached a vantage point overlooking the Zentari facility. David crouched low, using his binoculars to survey the area. The base was hidden within a rocky outcropping nearly invisible to the naked eye. The only signs of its presence were the faint glow of alien technology and the occasional flicker of movement from the sentries patrolling the perimeter. David scanned the area, noting the positions of the guards and the layout of the facility. It was heavily fortified, with automated defenses and sensors covering every approach. But he wasn't deterred. He had faced worse odds before, and this time he had the element of surprise. He signaled to Max, who immediately moved into position, circling around to flank the base. David activated his cloaking device and began his approach, moving silently through the shadows. The Zentari guards were tall, slender beings with elongated limbs and glowing eyes. They moved with a fluid grace, their senses honed to detect any intruders. But David was a ghost, slipping past them without a sound. He reached the outer wall of the facility and planted a small explosive charge, setting a timer for a controlled detonation. The plan was simple: create a distraction, breach the perimeter, and infiltrate the base to gather intelligence. Once inside, he would locate the central command room, access their systems, and shut them down. The explosive went off with a muffled thud, and immediately the base erupted into chaos. The Zentari guards rushed to the breach, their weapons drawn, but David was already inside, moving quickly through the corridors. Max joined him, having taken out a guard on the other side, his instincts as sharp as ever. The facility was a maze of corridors and rooms, each filled with alien technology that pulsed with an eerie light. David moved with purpose, his eyes scanning for anything that could lead him to the command center. He passed rooms filled with strange machinery, their purpose unknown, but he didn't stop to investigate. Time was of the essence. Finally, he found what he was looking for, a large door at the end of a heavily guarded corridor. This had to be it. He signaled to Max, who charged forward, taking down the guards with lethal efficiency. David followed close behind, using his rifle to pick off the remaining sentries. The door slid open with a hiss, revealing a vast chamber filled with consoles and holographic displays. At the center of the room was a massive pulsating orb of energy, connected to the consoles by thick cables. This was the heart of the Zentari operation, the control hub that coordinated their activities on Earth. David moved quickly, accessing the consoles and uploading the data to Briggs. He scanned through the information, his eyes narrowing as he realized the extent of the Zentari's plans. They were preparing for a full-scale invasion, using Earth as a staging ground for their conquest of the galaxy. Their technology was far beyond anything humanity could hope to counter, but David knew there had to be a weakness, a way to turn their own systems against them. As he worked, the room suddenly went dark. The consoles flickered, and the orb of energy began to pulse erratically. A deep, resonant voice filled the chamber, speaking in a language David didn't understand but could feel in his bones. The Zentari knew he was there, and they were coming for him. David didn't hesitate. He set the system to overload, triggering a self-destruct sequence that would destroy the facility and everything in it. He turned to Max, who was already at the door, ready to lead the way out. "Let's move, Max," David shouted, and they sprinted down the corridor, the walls shaking as the facility began to collapse around them. Explosions rocked the base, sending debris flying in all directions. But David and Max moved with the precision of a team that had faced death together countless times before. They burst out into the open air just as the facility erupted in a massive explosion, the shockwave sending them tumbling down the mountainside. David shielded Max with his body, rolling to absorb the impact. When they finally came to a stop, the facility was nothing more than a smoking crater in the distance. David struggled to his feet, his body aching from the fall. He checked Max, who was dazed but otherwise unharmed. They had done it. They had struck a blow against the Zentari, but David knew this was just the beginning. The data he had transmitted to Briggs would be vital in the fight ahead, but the Zentari would not take this defeat lightly. As they made their way back to the cabin, David couldn't shake the feeling that the Zentari were watching, waiting for their next move. But he was ready. They had taken Max and tried to break him, but all they had done was awaken the soldier within. The war had begun, and David would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. The hunt was far from over. The smoldering ruins of the Zentari facility were still visible in the distance as David and Max made their way back to the cabin. The mountain air was crisp, but David's mind was burning with determination. The data he had retrieved from the alien base confirmed the worst. The Zentari were planning a full-scale invasion of Earth, and their attack was imminent. Time was running out. As soon as they reached the cabin, David activated his secure terminal and connected with Colonel Briggs. The screen flickered to life, and Briggs' weathered face appeared, lines etched deep from years of combat and command. "Ghost, you did it," Briggs said, a rare note of admiration in his voice. "The data you sent us is a goldmine. We've confirmed the Zentari's invasion plans. They're targeting key military installations and population centers worldwide. We need to move fast." David nodded, his jaw clenched. "What's our next move, Colonel?" "We've mobilized the Revenant team and other special forces across the globe," Briggs replied. "But this isn't just a military operation. We need to take out their command structure, and for that we have to hit them where it hurts. According to the data you sent, the Zentari mothership is in low orbit, cloaked and heavily defended. It's the nerve center of their operation. If we can destroy it, we can cripple their entire invasion force." David's eyes narrowed. "And how do we get to it?" Briggs leaned closer to the screen, his voice grim. "We've located a Zentari teleportation hub hidden in an abandoned military bunker in the Mojave Desert. It's how they've been moving between Earth and their ship. If you can infiltrate that facility and activate the teleportation gate, you can get aboard the mothership and plant an explosive device in their central core. It's a suicide mission, Ghost. There's no way back once you're in." David didn't hesitate. "I'll do it." Briggs stared at him for a long moment, then nodded. "I figured you'd say that. I'll have the team cover your approach. Once you're inside, you're on your own." David ended the transmission and turned to Max. The German shepherd was lying on the floor, his eyes alert and focused. Despite the injuries he had sustained, Max was ready. David knelt down beside him, placing a hand on the dog's head. "This is it, buddy. One last mission, you with me?" Max responded with a determined bark, his tail wagging slightly. David smiled, a rare flicker of warmth in his otherwise hardened demeanor. They had been through hell together, and now they would face the ultimate challenge side by side. David quickly prepared for the mission, gathering the equipment he would need, explosives, weapons, and a specially designed device that Briggs had provided, an EMP bomb capable of disabling the Zentari systems. It was small but powerful, and it was their best shot at taking down the mothership. With everything in place, David and Max left the cabin, heading for the extraction point where a stealth chopper would take them to the Mojave Desert. As they flew over the darkened landscape, David reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. He had wanted a quiet life, far from the violence and chaos of his past, but fate had other plans. The world needed him, and he would not fail it. The chopper touched down a few miles from the Zentari teleportation hub. The desert was eerily quiet, the only sound being the wind whistling through the barren landscape. David and Max disembarked, and the chopper lifted off, disappearing into the night. They moved swiftly and silently across the sand, their senses attuned to any sign of danger. As they approached the bunker, David could see the faint glow of alien technology emanating from within. The entrance was guarded by Zentari soldiers, their elongated bodies and glowing eyes scanning the area with relentless precision. David activated his cloaking device, and Max blended into the shadows, their approach invisible to the guards. David took out the guards with swift, lethal efficiency, using his knife and silenced pistol. Max took down the last guard, his powerful jaws clamping down on the alien's neck, ending the threat silently. With the entrance clear, they moved inside the bunker. The interior of the bunker was a stark contrast to the desolate desert outside. The walls were lined with sleek, organic-looking panels that pulsed with a faint blue light. The air was thick with the hum of alien machinery, and strange symbols floated in the air, displaying data in a language David couldn't understand. They navigated the maze of corridors, avoiding patrols and security systems. David's mind was focused on the mission, every step calculated, every movement precise. Max followed close behind, his instincts guiding him through the unfamiliar environment. Finally, they reached the heart of the facility, the teleportation hub. The room was dominated by a massive circular platform, surrounded by alien consoles and machinery. A shimmering energy field crackled in the center, the gateway to the Zentari mothership. David approached the console and began hacking into the system, using the knowledge he had gained from the data he had retrieved earlier. The alien symbols shifted and changed as he input commands, and the energy field in the center of the room began to stabilize, forming a portal. He turned to Max. "This is it. Once we're through, there's no turning back." Max looked up at him, his eyes full of trust and loyalty. David nodded, and together they stepped onto the platform. The portal flared to life, engulfing them in a blinding light. There was a moment of disorientation as they were pulled through space, and then, just as suddenly, they were standing aboard the Zentari mothership. The interior of the ship was vast and alien, with corridors stretching out in every direction, their walls covered in the same pulsating organic material as the bunker. The air was filled with a low, resonant hum, and the gravity was slightly lighter than on Earth, giving everything an eerie, weightless feel. David quickly oriented himself, using the data he had gathered to navigate the ship's labyrinthine structure. The central core, where the EMP bomb needed to be planted, was deep within the ship, heavily guarded and fortified. But David was undeterred. This was what he had trained for. This was his purpose. As they moved through the ship, they encountered groups of Zentari soldiers, but David and Max took them down with ruthless efficiency. The Zentari were formidable opponents, but they were not prepared for the fury of a super soldier and his loyal companion. With each encounter, they grew closer to their goal. Finally, they reached the core. The room was massive, with a towering structure at its center, a pulsating, glowing sphere of energy surrounded by thick cables and alien machinery. This was the heart of the ship, the power source that drove its systems and coordinated the invasion. David approached the core, setting the EMP bomb at its base. He programmed the device, setting a timer for detonation. Once the bomb went off, it would create an electromagnetic pulse that would disable the entire ship, sending it crashing down to Earth. But as he was about to activate the bomb, a voice echoed through the chamber, deep and resonant, speaking in the Zentari's alien language. The voice was soon followed by the appearance of the Zentari leader, a tall, imposing figure with glowing eyes and an aura of power that seemed to distort the very air around him. The Zentari leader stepped forward, his gaze fixed on David. "Human," he said, his voice resonating in David's mind as if bypassing the need for language. "You are brave but foolish. You cannot hope to defeat us." David stood his ground, his hand hovering over the bomb's trigger. "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to end this." The Zentari leader's eyes flared with light, and David felt a crushing pressure in his mind, as if the alien was trying to break his will, to force him to submit. But David was no ordinary human. His mind had been hardened by years of combat and training. He resisted, pushing back against the alien's psychic assault. Max sensed David's struggle and leaped at the Zentari leader, his powerful jaws aiming for the alien's throat. The leader raised a hand, and Max was suspended in midair, caught in an invisible grip. The dog growled and struggled, but the Zentari's power was overwhelming. David's eyes widened in fury. "Let him go!" he shouted, his voice echoing through the chamber. The Zentari leader smiled, a cold, predatory grin. "You cannot stop what is inevitable, human. Your world will fall and you will be the first to—" Before the alien could finish, David pulled the trigger on the EMP bomb. The device activated, releasing a blinding pulse of energy that surged through the core, disrupting the Zentari leader's control and sending him reeling backward. Max dropped to the ground, immediately springing back to his feet, ready to fight. The core began to destabilize, its energy fluctuating wildly as the EMP bomb took effect. Alarms blared throughout the ship, and the walls trembled as the power systems overloaded. The Zentari leader staggered, his form flickering as the ship's systems failed. David didn't waste any time. He grabbed Max and ran for the nearest escape pod. The ship was collapsing around them, the corridors twisting and breaking apart as the core destabilized. The Zentari soldiers they encountered were disoriented, their minds affected by the EMP, and David and Max fought their way through with fierce determination. They reached the escape pod just as the ship began to break apart. David threw open the hatch and pushed Max inside, following close behind. He slammed the door shut and activated the launch sequence. The pod shot out of the ship, hurtling away from the destruction. As they descended toward Earth, David watched through the viewport as the Zentari mothership imploded, collapsing in on itself in a massive explosion that lit up the night sky. The debris rained down into the atmosphere, burning up as it entered the Earth's gravity. The escape pod hurtled through the atmosphere, the heat shields glowing red-hot as they re-entered Earth's atmosphere. David held Max close, shielding him as the pod rocked and shook. Finally, with a jarring impact, the pod hit the ground, skidding to a stop in the middle of a desert. David pried open the hatch, stepping out into the cool night air. The sky above was clear with no sign of the Zentari mothership. It was over. The invasion had been stopped. The world was safe, at least for now. Max limped out of the pod, his body still aching from the battle, but his spirit as strong as ever. He looked up at David, his eyes filled with trust and loyalty. David knelt beside him, placing a hand on the dog's head. "We did it, Max," he said softly. "We saved the world." As dawn began to break over the horizon, David knew that the fight was far from over. The Zentari were a powerful enemy, and they would not give up easily. But for now, they had won a crucial victory, and the bond between David and Max had proven stronger than any alien force. They would return to Redwood Pines, where life would return to some semblance of normalcy. But David knew that he could never fully leave behind the life of a soldier. He would remain vigilant, ready to protect the world and the ones he loved from whatever threats might come. The world might never know the true extent of the danger they had faced, but that didn't matter to David. What mattered was that they had fought together, as they always had, and emerged victorious. As the sun rose, David and Max walked away from the wreckage, ready to face whatever the future held, together. The hunt was over for now, but the war would continue, and they would be ready.